Okay, let's dive into this because in the incredibly complex, high-stakes world of construction, issues rarely just fix themselves, do they? Welcome to this explainer on conflict avoidance and dispute resolution, drawing straight from essential RICS professional guidance. What we're really looking at today is a vital prevent, detect, resolve framework. And listen, this isn't just dry academic theory, it's an active, practical toolkit that's designed to keep your projects on track, keep your cash flowing, and crucially, keep you and your clients entirely out of the courts.
So let me start by asking you a pretty serious reality testing question. Are you actively avoiding construction disputes, or are you kind of just waiting for them to happen? Because way too often in this industry, we treat disputes like an inevitable weather event, like rain on a site pour, rather than something we can actually engineer out of the system. Let's shift that mindset right now. We need to move from reacting to problems when they finally explode, to proactively solving them before the fuse is even lit.
So here is our roadmap for this explainer, and this maps directly to the RICS competency framework. We'll hit proactive conflict avoidance, the 3 pillars of resolution, standard form contracts, navigating claims and costs, and finally, knowing your professional limits.
All right, kicking things off with Section 1, proactive conflict avoidance.
And this brilliantly illustrates the idea that conflict avoidance is literally the solid foundation of any successful project. Just like clean architecture, having a highly structured approach to project management simply prevents friction. Because if your foundation is weak, well, every single level you build on top of it is at risk of crumbling under pressure. The source material highlights a massive truth here. Disputes don't just magically appear out of thin air. They almost always pop up from ambiguity or an unclear definition of risk right at the very start of a project. So, clear structure, clear lines of communication, and crystal clear documentation, that's how you keep the chaos out.
Let's rapidly fire through some of these foundational strategies. Good management and proactive reporting basically mean you aren't hiding from the bad news. You also absolutely need clear, detailed contract documentation that captures specific details, rather than just leaning on vague general specs. We're also talking about partnering and alliancing to build genuine cooperation, maintaining good payment practices, and keeping meticulous, contemporaneous records. Listen, vague specifications and late payments are the absolute easiest ways to crack a project's foundation. If you aren't paying your supply chain on time, or if your scope is a bit murky, you're practically begging for a dispute to move in and completely derail your project.
Moving into our maintenance phase with Section 2, the 3 pillars of resolution.
Now, what's really interesting about this is what happens when friction inevitably arises. We're seeing a massive trend toward mediation. In fact, research from King's College London, working with the Technology and Construction Court, shows that mediation is used to resolve about 35% of all construction disputes that head toward court. Think about that for a second. That's a huge chunk of conflict being solved without ever seeing a judge, which saves just an incredible amount of time, money, and professional relationships.
To truly understand the options here, we really need to look at the rule of 3. Notice how this resolution process essentially escalates. Starting with negotiation, this is pure problem solving, where you and the other party hold all the power and figure it out together. Then, mediation or conciliation. Here, a neutral third party facilitates the discussion, but the ultimate power to agree on a settlement still stays with you. Finally, adjudication or arbitration. This is where a third party actually steps in and imposes a binding decision on you. The takeaway here? The further right you go across this spectrum, the more control you lose over your own destiny.
So, enter adjudication. Introduced back by the Housing Grant, Construction, and Regeneration Act of 1996, this is arguably the most crucial statutory mechanism in UK construction today. Why? Because it guarantees a strict 28-day turnaround for a binding decision the moment the referral is issued. It was specifically designed to keep cash flowing, basically stopping projects from bleeding out and businesses from going completely under over unresolved payment disputes. It's fast, it's rough justice for sure, but it is highly, highly effective.
All right, part 3, standard form contracts.
When you're dealing with big standard form contracts like JCT, NEC3, or FIDIC, navigating a dispute shouldn't mean taking a high-speed elevator straight to the courtroom. It's much more like a staircase. The whole trend in modern contracts is this multi-tiered approach. You escalate carefully, step by step, genuinely attempting to resolve the issue at the lowest possible commercial level, rather than just jumping straight to the nuclear options of arbitration or litigation. Let's move to and see how this builds, step by step, much like the famous cable and wireless approach. Step 1, a formal notice of dispute crystallizes the issue. Step 2,
Senior managers get together and try to negotiate a fix. If that doesn't work, Step 3 escalates it to the chief executives of both organizations. Step 4 is mediation, and it's only if all of those collaborative efforts fail that we finally reach Step 5, arbitration or litigation. It is quite literally an engineered pathway designed to force a resolution before the lawyers take over the whole shebang. Which brings us to Section 4, navigating claims and costs. Shifting gears to the practical reality on-site, how exactly do we deal with time, money, and defects without triggering full-blown litigation? Well, here's a massive trap that so many professionals fall into, confusing prolongation with disruption. Prolongation relates directly to the costs of an extended period on-site. You're physically there longer, so naturally your site overheads cost more. Disruption, on the other hand, is the cost of working less efficiently. And get this, it doesn't necessarily require an extension of time. You might finish right on schedule, but it costs you double the manpower to pull it off because your workflow was disrupted. You absolutely must separate these two concepts to accurately evaluate claims and avoid the serious risk of double recovery.
And then we have constructive change. This happens when the scope of work clearly shifts, but there's no written variation order to back it up. So here's a quick reality test. What happens when an architect issues revised drawings that obviously require more work, but no official variation order ever follows? Well, failure to issue that written variation is actually a breach by the employer. The contractor still absolutely needs to be compensated for that change, and failing to recognize this constructive change is a huge source of nasty disputes at the final account stage.
But hold on, don't get carried away, because not all claims are admissible. What about the cost of preparing the claim itself? Yeah, generally, that is not a recoverable expense. The contractor is simply providing information to help the administrator figure out the cost. And what about unapproved acceleration of the works, or unapproved overtime? Also inadmissible. You can't just decide on your own to speed up the work, spend an absolute fortune on weekend overtime without prior agreement, and then casually send the client the bill. And finally, Section 5, knowing your professional limits. So the crucial point is that your ultimate safeguard against professional ruin is really understanding professional negligence. The courts are going to hold you to the standard of a reasonably competent expert in the specific area you are advising on. If you step out of your lane and start dishing out complex legal advice or structural engineering advice, the courts aren't going to lower their standards just because you're a surveyor and not a lawyer or an engineer. No way. You're going to be judged exactly as if you were the expert.
The RICS guidance really hits the nail on the head here. You must recognize when outside assistance is required. If you uncover a complex foundation issue, bring in a structural engineer immediately. If you hit a highly tricky contractual deadlock, get legal counsel involved early. You need to do this at the very first sign of trouble, rather than holding your breath and waiting for a crisis to explode when it's far, far too late to fix it economically. Seeking early specialist advice is honestly one of the best forms of conflict avoidance there is.
So I want to wrap up this explainer with one final provocative question that really sums up our entire framework. Are you building a bulletproof project? Are you leaving your client completely exposed to the demolition of litigation? By adopting proactive management, truly understanding that escalation staircase, properly evaluating your claims, and strictly knowing your professional limits, you can engineer conflict right out of the equation. Take these strategies back to your next site meeting and let's start building better outcomes.